This is the Fatty Joe Show, coming to you from Casa de Carrie, deep in the forests of Nutmeggerville. This show is dedicated to exploring pathways to better health from a holistic perspective. In each episode, we will explore such topics as nutrition, mental and emotional health, fitness, and more. I'm Yogi, your host, and I became interested in studying health after conventional health dogma became damaging and led me to become massively overweight. Against modern convention, I went on a keto lifestyle and I lost over 300 pounds and gained a level of control on my personal health that I never had before. Now I'm on a journey to find out what is myth and what is truth in the ever convoluted world of what is considered healthy. Come join me on a journey of discovery as I look for a path to improve total health. If you'd like to support the show, head over to patreon.com/thefattyjoeshow or patreon.com/Carrie Brown. If you want to check out all of our social media links and recipes, head to carriebrown.com. Don't forget to leave a comment, like, and subscribe to the show. Hey everybody, and welcome back to the Fatty Joe Show. This episode I have Siobhan Huggins, who works with Dave Feldman on the cholesterol code as well as their lab work and nonprofit work. Siobhan is an extremely intelligent person and one of those people with those engineer minds that I just absolutely love to talk to and learn so much from. This is another one of those episodes that I was really getting into, and the time went a little bit more excessive than I had expected it to go. So again, we are going to break it down into 2 episodes. This way, you can enjoy both episodes but not be overwhelmed by the length of time that it would take to play the whole thing at once. So I want to thank you all for tuning in, and I want to encourage you to go check out our YouTube channel. Going and watching the shows and cooking videos, how-to videos, Keto 101s, and other interviews that we do on there really helps us by bringing in a little extra income to help cover the cost of making a podcast. Making a podcast is not an inexpensive thing, as I'm coming to find out. So it really helps us out if you can go over there and check that out. Also, if you want to become a Rockstar Patreon and help support the podcast and keep us going, you could do that as well at patreon.com/thefattyjoeshow or patreon.com/Carrie Brown. At the end of the episode, I'm going to give a couple of shout outs to some of our Patreons who have been supporting us and helping us keep moving. So be sure to listen for that. And also, if you would, please leave a comment and review down below. That also helps the podcast get out to more people. Without further ado, here is Siobhan Huggins. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Fatty Joe Show, coming to you from Casa de Carrie in the heart of the Nutmegger Forest, where it's snowing out with about 2 feet of snow right now that I got to shovel this morning. That was awful fun. Today, we have an awesome guest. It's Siobhan Huggins, who works with Dave Feldman and has done an amazing amount of research herself into all types of aspects of lipid theory and how the lipids function in the body, different ketogenic aspects, fasting, all kinds of stuff. The lady has a resume as long as anybody out there. So I can get into all kinds of stuff, and we kind of were off camera. So with no further ado, I'm going to introduce Siobhan Huggins and ask her to give us her superhero origin story.
Yeah, hi. Thanks so much for having me on. We were talking about it a little bit ago, but I guess I should go back even further than like before I met Dave. What actually got me into a ketogenic diet was my mom. I had previously been obese. Highest weight was 240 pounds. So I was hypertensive, chronically depressed, joint pain, just not good, not doing well. And I had been exploring calorie restriction for like the umpteenth time, even though it didn't work any of the previous times. And it really made me miserable when I was doing it. And the sad thing is, every single time I'd try and restrict like more, like, oh, maybe that's why last time didn't work. I just wasn't doing it hard enough. And when I started getting down really low, like 800 calories a day, it started worsening my depression and causing really bad mood swings and stuff like that. And yeah, so I was contemplating doing that. And I talked to mom, and she was like, "Oh, I've actually been looking into this ketogenic diet thing," because she'd already been doing paleo. And I think she had originally been looking into it because she'd had a concussion and she'd read some stuff about it being useful for traumatic brain injury. Or that was a coincidence, I'm not sure. But regardless, mom is one of the smartest people I know. And even though I was like, oh, this seems like a fad type of thing, because it's mom, I'll go ahead and look into it. And when I did find things that kind of supported that, yeah, there actually is science behind this. And so I decided I would try it for 2 months, and if it worked, then I just had to stick to it forever, because if I went back to what I was doing previously, I'd probably just encounter the same problems. And so I really went into it from the perspective of weight loss, but 2 months in, one thing that happened is the depression that I'd had for about a decade went into complete remission. And it was startling for me because I have this moment I'll probably never forget where I was just standing in this parking lot and I was overcome with this feeling. And it's like, what is this feeling? And I realized, oh, I'm actually contented with my life. I'm happy with my family. I'm happy with my friends. I'm happy with my job. And I hadn't felt contentment in nearly a decade. So I guess that says a lot. And I was like, "Oh, this is like a big thing." And I had also lost 20 pounds over those 2 months, and so I was like, "Okay, I guess I'm sticking to this forever." And for a while, I was worried like it suddenly stopped working for some reason, but it hasn't really. I mean, I've made tweaks here and there to kinda get closer to where I want, but the basic ketogenic diet premise has pretty much stayed the same, even though the details have changed a little bit. But a couple months in, I was looking for podcasts to listen to while I was working, because there was a lot of script work that I was doing, so I just needed something to listen to while working on that. And I came across an interview with Tom Naughton from the Two Keto Dudes. And I was like, oh, I actually watched Fathead with my mom like a month ago. And so I kind of want to hear what this guy is saying. And at the beginning of the podcast, the podcasters, Carl and Richard, were talking about addressing if they had made any mistakes in the previous episode. And I was like, oh, they're like fessing up to any mistakes and kind of clarifying or correcting themselves. That's really awesome. I love that. Um, and so I just started downloading like all of the episodes that were available at the time. And eventually I joined their Facebook group and their forum, and then I volunteered at the first Keto Fest that they put on in Connecticut. And that's where I met Dave. It's where I met Amber, who I currently live with. And so that's kind of my origin story is the two keto dudes, my mom kind of pointing me in a good direction. And yeah, going to Keto Fest, meeting Dave, and just being captivated by him because he was talking about things from this engineering perspective, uh, like saying how the lipid system is like very much like a distributed object network. And I was working in IT at the time, so it's like I totally know what that means. I understand what you're saying. You're putting this in terms I can follow, and that's really fascinating that it might be related to this other thing I really enjoy. And yeah, so that's how it started. Just geeking out with Dave pretty much.
Nice. And since then, you've led a ton of research on your own, and as well as partnered with Dave. And you've really gotten into a lot of aspects that are related to the ketogenic diet, including how lipids work in the body, what their function is, what happens when you do fat fast, what happens when you do water only fast, what happens. Like I almost every time I hear you on a podcast, you're talking about a new experiment that you've undertook. Uh, and one of the things that
you're going into recently is talking about inflammation and its importance in the human body and its importance in keto. So can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, definitely. One thing I had noticed that tends to happen is that inflammation tends to get a bad rap. So you'll hear about it in regards to things like arthritis or cardiovascular disease, even. It's now being described as an inflammatory disease, the dangers of inflammation, all this type of stuff. And then you'll hear about ketogenic diets, and people will describe them as anti inflammatory. And it's like, oh, that must be like a good thing. That's really good. But I started looking into inflammation because I was very interested in the immune system and how it works, and I realized that inflammation is actually extremely important. If you break your leg or, get sick, you need inflammation to kind of sterilize the area of any infection that might occur with any open wound or anything like that. And, to heal tissue, to regrow, to just clear things out, like all this stuff is extremely important. And the other thing is, if you exercise, for example, if you don't have inflammation, you can't grow muscle. Like they've done studies on this where they're giving people antioxidants or anti inflammatories, and it'll inhibit the muscle growth that comes after exercise because exercise is technically a stressor and you need to kind of repair that tissue and build it back up again. And inflammation is necessary for that process. So then I started thinking, oh, so maybe is cardiovascular disease an inflammatory process because there's damage going on? Like that might make some sense. And then other things like arthritis, like how does inflammation play into all this stuff? And so I started to understand it more, not as this evil thing that randomly occurs, but often it's because it's responding to an injury or some irritation or things like that, even if it's a good irritation like exercise. And taking that into consideration, now looking at the claim that ketogenic diets are anti inflammatory takes on a whole new meaning. And so I did a presentation on inflammation at Keto Salt Lake. And one of the questions I got is, I mean, does this mean that ketogenic diets are going to be bad if you break a leg or get an infection or things like that? It's like, no, I think what's actually happening is the standard American diet is inflammatory, so causing some sort of injury, some sort of stressor. And then you go on a ketogenic diet and those stressors or whatever it is maybe goes away and then you don't need the inflammation anymore after a certain point. And so it's not necessarily that ketogenic diets are inherently anti-inflammatory. It may just be that they're non-inflammatory to start with. So, for example, I've done testing of ketones when I've gotten sick, for example. And one really consistent thing is if I'm sick enough to necessitate a certain response to defend myself against that infection, then my ketones will go down and my glucose will go up. And that's totally what I would expect because immune cells, when they're trying to defend or repair something, they start running off of glucose. And so then having glucose available by having higher blood sugar, I mean, that's supplying energy to them. It's really helpful for them. So that makes perfect sense. And then there is some research suggesting that ketone bodies may be an anti-inflammatory signal. So it makes total sense to downregulate those if you need inflammation in response to something. And I've seen similar with people who've gotten physical injuries, burns or broken a limb or anything like that. They'll be like, why are my ketones so low? I haven't changed my diet. And it's like, you're in an inflammatory state. Once you heal up, you'll probably just go back to whatever your normal is because you won't need that inflammation anymore. And similarly, with type 2 diabetics, where there is research suggesting they may have higher levels of inflammation for whatever reason, I don't think we know the specifics yet. When they go on a ketogenic diet, they can often have lower ketones, and sometimes that's sustained for a long time. And I think in that case, it's probably that they're still recovering from whatever damage was caused from their previous diet, whatever that was. And so, yeah, you didn't become diabetic over the course of a day. I can understand why it might take a long time to recover. And Sarah Hallberg from Virta, she works with type 2 diabetics through the Virta program. And she stated that sometimes it can take diabetics, if they've been diabetic for a decade, a couple of years. So yeah, I can kind of see that happening. So that was kind of a lot, but hopefully it gives kind of a brief overview of just how important inflammation is. I mean, without it, we would be dead. That's
right.
And so when we're talking about chronic inflammation, yes, I think chronic inflammation is a bad sign, but I'm looking at it more now. It's not necessarily the inflammation that's bad. It's the fact that we're needing inflammation for decades without any rest in between. Like, clearly something is going wrong there. And I think it means a lot that if people change their diet through ketogenic diets or other options, then we start seeing those conditions resolve. And it's like, okay, so maybe we're fixing the underlying problem, or at least finding a loophole where we're excluding some big trouble through a low carb diet, and then we can start seeing resolution. And yeah, it seems like a fairly sensible thing to do, especially because it does seem to be pretty consistent with how well it works.
It seems from what you're saying that inflammation has gotten a similar bad rap for a similar reason cholesterol has. It's around when there's a problem, there's inflammation in the cells and things like that. So you want to deal with the inflammation when it comes to heart disease or rheumatoid arthritis. Just the same as when they tested for cholesterol in comparison to heart disease. And they're like, well, when people have high heart disease, they have high cholesterol for LDL particles, so they must be related. But they didn't look further than that to go, well, what's causing the inflammation or what's causing the high LDL? Like, is it a response to a problem that you can deal with this underlying problem, or is it the actual problem?
Right. And I think that's such an important question for so many things. Like, is it the actual problem, or is it a response to the problem? And that clarification just needs to be done on basically everything. I mean, is acute inflammation going to increase your chance for heart disease risk down the road? I mean, that's kind of difficult to suss out, but at least we know with indigenous populations, for example, they may get infections because, sometimes they don't have access to antibiotics and things like that, but we don't see a high rate of heart disease with them. And so I'm wondering if maybe it is just an overwhelming of the system where you have this constant problem that's just never getting resolved. And yeah, with cholesterol, it is a little bit tricky because you can have these two scenarios of environmental factors playing into cholesterol levels. Like, I'm sure Dave talked about the energy aspect of that and how diet can play in, and fat metabolism, things like that. But then you do also have the immune system side of things, where inflammation and infection, underlying issues, metabolic syndrome may be playing into levels. And so then the question is, if you take out the consideration of the immune system aspect, so if you look at healthy people with high LDL, do we see cardiovascular disease problems? That's tough because most people in the US aren't healthy. But that's why we're doing the Lean Mass Hyperresponder Project, because it will really help remove that confounder, because these are people with normal blood pressure, non-hyperinsulinemic. They don't have high insulin levels all the time. Their inflammation markers are usually very low, and they only have this like one thing where they have high LDL. And it's like, are they going to develop heart disease at a higher rate than other healthy people who have lower LDL? And we'll have to see. That's kind of pending. And I wouldn't dismiss the possibility that it may still be a problem. I mean, the whole point of doing the Lean Mass Hyperresponder study is because we don't know, and this is an extremely important question. But yeah, the context thing is so tricky, because we want to identify something and we want to say that's bad and we need to address that. But we also need to make sure that that's actually the case, because if it isn't, then we could be wasting resources that we could better spend doing something else. especially in the case of people using ketogenic diets for epilepsy, for example. I mean, there are very important reasons where going off isn't a great solution, but then they have this cholesterol question. It's like, is this going to cause other problems? And if so, they need that information so they can say this trade-off is worth it to me or it isn't worth it to me. And I think that's important when considering anything, any decision, is just weighing all of the information and using the strongest data that we can get. And then just giving that to people and saying, here you go, talk to your doctor about this, and then decide what you're comfortable with, because it's your life. It's not anyone else's.
Well, it seems like we get into a lot of trouble when we oversimplify the processes of the body and we don't look deeper into things. We do this quite a lot with all kinds of aspects of our civilization. We tend to look at the problem, but not the sources of the problem. And we then, especially with how media reports things, we fall into a trap of misinformation. You know, the Kale Diet is one thing that always pops to my head, in my head when we talk about this thing. Somebody in the research said kale does these beneficial things to your body, and then the media took it and went, kale is the most healthy thing on the planet. You should only eat kale. And people were like, oh, well, yeah. So how we look at these issues, which is why I love having people with engineering minds on the show, versus there's some doctors who think this way too, but engineers seem to be more willing to accept when a theory is wrong and want to break things down to its smaller components to find what the actual problem is, and not just stopping in one area.
Yeah, I agree. And it's something that you come across in IT a lot as well. Like if I was working on the help desk and I was finding that my assumptions weren't fitting with the problem that I was seeing, and I just dismissed it as, oh, then the program must not work or something, instead of being like, oh, maybe I'm wrong and I'm just approaching this, or what I'm thinking is the problem isn't actually the problem, probably wouldn't have lasted very long. You do really need to kind of get down to the root of things and try and really understand. And that can be difficult, especially with bodies and metabolism, because it is the most complex machinery you will ever come across. An absolute wonderful feat of engineering. The more I learn about it, the more I just fall in love with how complex and yet simplistic and efficient it is. And sure, there can be some mess ups, but for the large part, it works really, really well. And trying to just understand that and sort through just this mess of data, especially when, food, like nutritional epidemiology is really popular, and you'll see it pop up over and over again. Eggs are good, eggs are bad, red meat is good, red meat is bad, et cetera, et cetera. And it's an issue because the strength of the data you're working with is really, really important. If you're using bad, weak data, then the conclusions you make are probably also going to be fairly weak. So things like food frequency questionnaires, where they're eating like, oh, how many cups of chicken wings have you eaten in the past year? Who knows the answers to that question? And it's like 200 of these similar questions, and expecting people to recall things, especially when they have biased memories. They have, just people in general don't have very good recall over the course of a year. And then also when you're doing that, you also have a ton of confounded data, because these are living human beings. Like they're not actually machines. And so you have things like healthy user bias, where it's like, oh, they eat less red meat because they're health conscious and they're told that red meat isn't healthy for them, which also probably means that they're also going to be more active. They're going to be, not smoking as frequently or at all. And so, like, how do you even come up with anything meaningful from that? It's extremely difficult. And so you have things that's like a hazard ratio of 1.2, and it's like, does that even mean anything? Is that just noise? And generally with epidemiology, what you're looking for is really, really strong associations But typically you don't make conclusions from that. You have follow-up studies afterwards to isolate out what you think is happening and confirm it will actually happen in a controlled setting. But a lot of these articles about, whatever study that's come out or reworking of some study that came out like 20 years ago is just taking the data from these food frequency questionnaires and then saying, oh, eggs are this or that. And it's like, wait, we can't draw conclusions from this. We have to investigate this further and see if this stands up in a clinical setting where everything else is controlled, so we can really make sure that we're sure.
Right.
And it's just so difficult. And I've even seen people sharing these types of studies when it supports low carb. Like, oh, this epidemiology study said that eating more cheese is good for, preventing dementia, or, eggs are good, or drinking juice is bad. And it's like, wait, if we're going to evaluate the data and we're criticizing the use of epidemiology when it's saying red meat is bad or saturated fat is bad, then we really should be careful to make sure that we're doing the same thing, even if it supports our own biases. And so we do have to read through the study and look at how strong it is, what type of study it is. And then if it's not good, just don't share it. Just don't share it. So part of what I do on Twitter, for example, is just like hazard ratio under 2. I'm not reading any further. Food frequency questionnaire, no. Didn't control for this or that. No, I'm not bothering with this. And we do have stronger data. We have stuff from Verta. We have, there's a lot of research on ketogenic diets now, and more that's coming out looking at ketogenic diets for mood disorders and this other stuff. So we don't have to rely on that. And, so I'd much prefer everyone was just like looking into the study and saying, oh, I know what this type of study is, and I know the problems with it, and I don't want to draw conclusions off of it, because it's very possible that they could be wrong. Or at least maybe it is true, but you can't figure that out based off of that type of study. So I probably annoy a lot of people because it's like, well, I don't think we should really be holding this up as some holy grail when it's just another not very good epidemiological study looking at nutrition that is just not good data. It's just not good data.
There also seems to be that factor of biodiversity too, where your genetics and even your regional evolution from different areas can play a role in how much carbs you can tolerate, how much meat you can tolerate. Allergies play a role. If you're allergic to certain foods that could be the most nutrient dense, most keto foods on the planet, but you eat them, and you having even a mild allergic response to it and creating inflammation in the body, then these things aren't going to be good for you.
Right, yeah. I mean, as an example, I think eggs are great. They have lots of nutrition, all this type of stuff. I'm allergic to them. If I eat them, it's not healthy for me. And so,
Right.
yeah, if I eat something that's an irritant, like eggs, and I'm necessitating inflammation to deal with that irritation, then I can bet I'm not going to feel very good. I might be having more difficulty losing weight or things like that. I've experienced that with dairy, for example. I had a period where I couldn't eat any dairy. I would immediately stop losing weight, and it sucked.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of those things are very context dependent. Dairy in particular, it's like people can do fine with it, and then they have this big event and suddenly they can't tolerate it anymore, or they went a long time without being able to tolerate it, assuming it's not like a lactose intolerance thing. Um, and then they do something or they get extremely healthy and it's like, oh, I can have dairy again. It's like, okay, so not only do we have, genetic components, who knows how much that plays in as far as relevance goes, but we also have health context, which I think is a massive thing. Like if you take a type 2 diabetic and put them on a Ketogenic diet or a traditional Okinawan diet, they may not respond as well because their health context is completely different. But if you take someone who's never been on a largely unhealthy diet before and they're metabolically healthy, they may be able to eat traditional diets all day long. And I think this is another troublesome component of oversimplifying, where it's like, oh, we can use low carb as this treatment protocol. and it works really, really well. Therefore, the problem is carbs at the start. It's like, wait, but we do have societies that eat very high carb and they're not developing diabetes or, cancer at high rates as we do, or all these other issues that we're seeing. It may be that there's more context playing in, and it may be far more complicated than we initially may think. But because the low carb explanation makes so much more sense than, oh, it's just excess calories or whatever else, we immediately want to think it's fully, completely true. And there's still so much that we just don't understand yet. And so again, it's like we have to be careful not to oversimplify and approach things with nuance and really make room for contradictory data and take that in and understand that our understanding of what is happening is not complete yet. And it may not be complete for a long time because it's complicated. But in the meantime, that's not to say that low carb, keto, carnivore isn't a really excellent therapeutic option. It's like, I think it can kind of be told in the way of, we know that antibiotics are really helpful when we have an infection, but that doesn't mean that we develop infections because we have an antibiotic deficiency. So that's kind of a similar parallel to that. And because we do have contradictory evidence where these other societies are eating sometimes very high carb, but they're not developing these diseases of civilization, I don't think it can be simplified down to just, oh, it's carb excess. Even though that's a very unpopular thought in the low carb space, I think it is important to acknowledge that and be honest about it, even if I don't know what the real answer is.
And also the context of the carbs as well. It plays, I think, a huge role in it. One of the things we do in our society versus a lot of the tribal societies that do eat a lot of high carb foods is they eat whole high carb foods. They eat whole fruits, whole things, whereas we distill and bring things down to a simplistic, isolate version of that carbohydrate and strip everything away from it that may work with that carbohydrate to be beneficial to the body. So things like sugar is a concentrated form of carbohydrate energy that we may not be doing very well with that concentrated form versus eating a banana or having some rice with some resistant starch or something like that.
Right. And so I think that's a really good way of approaching it is we know these people are healthy on this high carb diet. We know America's definitely not anywhere close to healthy on the diet that we're eating. So what is the difference between the two? And that's a complicated question in itself because there's a million little differences. There's the seed oils, there's stuff we use that may or may not be a problem, like sweeteners and all this other type of stuff. But if we start looking at, okay, we know they're eating this in this form, so that's probably not the problem. And we know this other people's eat a very high fat diet that's animal based and they don't seem to be having issues. Maybe that's not the problem either. So what is the problem? Like, clearly we're doing something different. And then whenever we introduce our diet to other people, they likewise get sick. So, okay, that's a consistent thing. So Okinawa is an excellent example. They used to be a blue zone. They used to be one of the healthiest people. And then, the Western diet got introduced. They started getting McDonald's, which isn't to diss McDonald's in entirety. I like their burger patties, but they started getting this Americanized food culture, and then suddenly they're one of the unhealthiest places in Japan. It's like, okay, so there's something there, and we just need to do a better job at trying to figure out what that is. And in the meantime, low carb as a therapy, totally for that, at least as far as the data we have on it right now. The longer term data, the better, and I know Verda's definitely working on that. And yeah, just trying to stem the tide until we can fully understand makes sense to me, especially when these are such profound health issues that damage the quality of life so badly. And then, of course, trying to explore, does low carb have downsides to it over the longer term? Is there anything we need to worry about with regards to that? I think that's also worth exploring. And so it's much more nuanced and kind of annoying because it's like, okay, yeah, I can't just say it's this problem, or, this is going to probably take a really long time to figure out. And first of all, understand our current problem, and then understand the underlying issues with that so that we can make sure it doesn't happen again. Because this is bad.
Right.
And I don't like people getting sick and, having to undergo amputations or having mood issues that may be related to diet or, joint pain like I had, or just dealing with obesity. It's a difficult thing. And it's very sad and disheartening, especially when we can't get good advice to them. And then when we do, it's still not a simple process. It's very difficult sometimes, and it can take a very long time to recover from that. And so, if people never had to go through that, and we could say we had this health crisis at this point in time and we figured out what it was, let's never do that again. Like, sure, we might run into other problems, but at least we could prevent this from happening to other people.
Yeah, and when you're going back to inflammation, if you've done something that has caused a lot of inflammation to your body and kept you in chronic inflammation, almost like an allergic response or an overdose. Let's say our access to simple carbohydrates, we've overdosed on that, created a lot of inflammation. And because of our bodies learn to react to that inflammation, that the stimuli of having the carbohydrates, maybe we start reacting to any form of carbohydrate.
Yeah, and I think that context is very important to consider because that also brings up, if someone gets to an extremely healthy point, insulin on point, inflammation markers all low, all this type of stuff, and they have really resolved the underlying issue, is it possible that they could introduce more traditional forms of carbohydrate again? I think possibly in some cases, and I've seen people do this before where they were diabetic and they went keto or carnivore for many, many years and they got to an extremely good health place and then they did reintroduce carbohydrate and they didn't become diabetic again. That's anecdotal though, and it may depend on a whole bunch of factors that we have no clue of. But that context, I think, is something that's probably going to be a large focus in the future of trying to understand what's happening, because that may actually be a big clue if it ends up being a consistent thing. But then there are complications, like if you're unintentionally doing something that's preventing you from getting to that place, or maybe there's damage that's so severe that you can't get to that place again, then we also need to know that and say, hey, based on this data that we have, I don't think you're going to be able to get to that point, and this may be a lifelong thing for you. And if we could just really personalize that data and understand and then give people that, I think that would be extremely powerful. And currently it's just, well, we know this works pretty consistently, but beyond that, I don't know.
Right. And it seems like once people find something that works, they stop asking why.
Mm,
And that seems to be a problem because if you don't ask why it works, then you may be on an emotional level or on a logical level, hold to it when it stops working and you need to try something else. But it worked for you before. You didn't ask why. You didn't research why it worked. So you don't understand now why it's not going to work.
definitely. Or if you're interacting with other people, you could say, well, this worked for me. And then
Hmm.
someone else is saying, well, it didn't work for me. I really did do it. I really did try. I stuck to all the rules. I did everything you're saying, and it just didn't work. And your
Right.
immediate response might be, oh, you must not have been doing it right. You must have been doing something wrong, because this worked for me. And it's like there's two different people involved here, which means two different health contexts. So I know some people who went keto and really strict keto, and they didn't lose weight, and they were obese at the time, and their diabetes wasn't resolving even after multiple years on keto. And they had tried a month of carnivore, like higher protein carnivore, that wasn't working. And finally, they decided to try high fat carnivore, and then things started shifting in the right direction. Why is that? I don't think we
Right.
have any clue at the moment, but I mean, there are some commonalities. Extremely low irritant for very sensitive people. Like Michaela Peterson, for example, has talked about how if she eats out at a restaurant and they've used oil on the grill, for example, she could react to that, and some of her symptoms may be coming back. For me, as another example, I did go through that period where I couldn't tolerate dairy very well. And spices were also similar for me. There were certain spices that were very irritating for me. They were causing digestive distress. But then on another side, I know someone else who could eat spices all day long and be perfectly fine. So one of the important components, I think, with health is just experimenting over and over and over and not assuming that you'll react the same way someone else will, even though generally we can say, oh, if we put people on a ketogenic diet, 80% of them start resolving their diabetes or whatever. So sure, but on the other hand, there's probably more nuance to that, where if you run into a problem, it may not be that ketogenic diets in general don't work. It may just be that there's a missing component that needs to be addressed for it to work for you. And that means, if you do run into problems like the person I mentioned, then you just have to keep trying different things and keeping an eye on things. And okay, this didn't work. I tried this version and it did work, or things improved, but not quite. So I'll work with this for now and make that my baseline and then experiment around that. And then, of course, things may change over time. I can't tell you how many times my diet has changed over the past nearly 4.5 years. And it's just a lot of tweaking. But the good thing is, like, if I get burnt out on trying different things, I can just stick with whatever I'm doing at the time and just pause. Just be like, I'm okay with staying where I am for a little while and just worrying about other things in my life, because I do have hobbies, I do have a job, I have somewhat of a social life. And sometimes I just don't want to worry about things and get super obsessive for a while. I just want to take a break. And I'm really glad that I do have that and I can do that, where I know I won't start backsliding if I just don't worry about it for a little while. And that doesn't mean like going back to a standard American diet. It just means, sticking to carnivore that I know generally works for me. And it's just nice to just pull the brakes for a second, be like, I'm not thinking about this for a while.
Right. And one of the things that people look at as like a panacea for all types of ailments and things, and it's not just the ketogenic diet, but many people got into to lower inflammation and also address allergies and things is fasting. And that's something that you have been doing a lot of research with right now, with doing extended periods of fasting and then high fat refeeding.
Yeah, so a recent experiment I did a couple months ago was I had this baseline setup of my normal, stricter carnivore diet where there aren't any spices or dairy involved. And I did that for a week leading in just to get some good baseline data. And then I did 2 weeks of water fasting because I've already done 1 week. And I was like, well, I kind of want to see what happens past that point. And I also wanted to compare that against fat only feeding. So only eating fat like broth with marrow fat in it, for example, or tea with butter emulsified in. And then going back to that baseline diet again, and then just seeing the data over that course of time and what changes and how did I feel. Overall, I didn't like it. Fasting is incredibly boring. And the other thing is that this experiment was about 5 weeks total with no breaks. Like there's no room for error in there, because anything I do where, oh, I just want to be lazy today, or, oh, I just want to have like a diet soda today. Like, no, you can't do that because you have no idea what impact that may have on the data. And for me, my general kind of rule with fasting is that if I want to fast, then I'll fast. But if I get hungry, I'm going to eat. And with that period, I felt like at the weight I was at, I could comfortably sustain fasting for a while. And I had really been feeling the urge to do a longer fast for some time, especially after tightening up my diet a little bit and kind of being more careful with what I was eating. And so I was like, okay, let's do this. It'll probably be the last time I'll ever do a fast of this length because I'm much closer to normal weight now. especially after that. And so, yeah, I got lots of good data from it. And the interesting thing that happened, as I had mentioned before, is after that, I've been able to tolerate a little bit of spices and various types of high fat dairy seemingly without issue. So before when I would eat dairy or spices multiple times, like in a week, like multiple days in a row, um, I would start having really, really poor moods. I'd start getting anxious for no reason. I'd have very low energy, especially after eating. And I would either gain weight or I would not lose weight. And it's just like, why? Because I love both of those things. So this is not fair. And as a matter of fact, for the first year of carnivore, I was primarily eating pork and cream cheese, and I was losing weight like crazy. I lost like 15 pounds or something over the first couple weeks. And so it's like, I know this wasn't an issue before. So why is it an issue now? And one of the things that happened between those 2 points and immediately after I started seeing the issues with dairy and spices is I had done a high carb, very high calorie experiment that had lasted about 8 days. And I gained something like 17 pounds over the course of the experiment and then in the lead up, because even after I stopped the experiment and went back to high fat carnivore, I kept gaining weight. It's like, why? And I had sustained that 17-pound gain for a year. And even after going back to carnivore, I was like, okay, maybe I just need to wait it out. Nothing, like it was not coming off. And I was having all these mood issues. And it's like, okay, a big reason I'm on a ketogenic diet is because it keeps my depression in remission. And then I'm having these mood effects. Like, this is extremely upsetting and worrying to me, because what if I did something and now it's not working at all? Like, that's a nightmare scenario for me. And finally, at some point, I was like, I'm just going to go down to meat and butter, because I don't think that'll probably be an issue if it is dairy, and water. And then I can really see if it's something, even if I don't know why. If I can just try this and see. And once I did that, so I was doing high fat carnivore, which for me is like 2 grams of fat per 1 gram of protein, and high fat burgers, like 70-30 type, and then extra butter on top, no spices, no nothing. And then I started losing weight and I was like, oh my God, I have so much energy now. Oh, I feel great after meals. I'm wanting to spontaneously fast, all this type of stuff. And it's like, if I hadn't been open to the thought of maybe something has changed with the context I'm in, I would still be just messed up, just not happy, not content, not where I want to be, not feeling good, not having lots of energy. And so, yeah, it's another one of those things where it's like, sometimes you just have to experiment, even if the reason why doesn't quite make sense, and just be open to the possibility of things changing, because it's extremely complex. And even after that, like, sure, I have some hypotheses for why that might have happened, but as long as I can get back to where I want to be, that's what I care about, and I can worry about the why later, but not forget the why and not think about the why, because again, that could become relevant for someone else, even like, oh, actually, I experienced this. If you're having the same problem, maybe that's also your problem.
I read this book when I was just starting my keto journey. It was actually a little ways into starting my keto journey, where I was hearing all these different approaches of why people were losing fat, and some people weren't on the ketogenic diet. And I wanted to understand fat a little bit better. So I read The Secret Life of Fat by Sylvia Tara.
I love that book.
Oh, it's a great book. It really is a great book. And I love how she breaks down what fat is, what it does in the body, how it functions. And one of the things she talks about is not just your genetics playing a role in your fat storage and your heritage and things like that, but also infections from viruses and bacteria can actually alter your metabolism in a way, your fat storage systems. to where you could either hyper storage any kind of calorie you take in, whether fat or carbohydrate, or you may not be able to store calories very well. And you have to eat a lot just to maintain being skinny, not going too skinny. So it seems like the human body is such a complex thing, and there's so many mitigating factors. We can't be pigeonholed into one method, even if it's just for us, because something even in our environment could affect how we store fat, or how much we eat, or how we burn the fat.
Yeah, and this isn't to imply that this is like some impossible thing to figure out, like you're never going to be able to get healthy because there's thousands and thousands of different things that could be leading into this. We know tactics that generally work for most people. And if you're still running into problems, the community exists so that you can say, hey, I'm still having this lingering issue. What have you guys tried if you've had a similar issue that helped you resolve it? And that might be carnivore for some people. It might be whatever, any number of things. It might be totally unrelated to diet, where you have some underlying issue that isn't resolving, that has nothing to do with what you're eating, and you have to fix that first before your problems are going to get better. But that's kind of why I love the community, is because there's such a feedback system where it's like, okay, I know this is probably going to work, but if not, I have a support system where I can ask other people who've been through the same thing and really narrow down what to look for, what are the signs of it may be this issue or that issue, and then how to fix it. Like that in itself. So it's not meant to imply that this is some super overwhelming thing. Sometimes it can be a little bit difficult in the beginning just to wrap your mind around the concepts. But generally for most people, it's like they go keto and then, they're pretty much fine from there. I deal a lot with, the problem children where they have these lingering issues in really complicated situations. So that's mostly where I'm speaking from, but that is not the vast majority of people.
Yeah, as we've talked about several times, the human body is such a complex organism, a complex machine with so many variables to it. It's really hard to isolate things down. I am a big fan of personalizing your approach to whatever it needs to be. There's conditions I know where people have genetic conditions where they cannot store and process fat very well. And for those people, the guy who invented the UCAN superstarch, his son could not store calories. They had to wake his son up several times a night to make him eat, or else he would die. And so they invented this superstarch that the kid could process and would stay in the system so that he could actually sleep. And it's now hit the market. But so many factors play a role. It's just amazing. And I really hope that people will take from this conversation that not to be so dogmatic about their approach to health and lifestyle, that sometimes some experimentation is needed.
Yeah, definitely. Experimentation is such a huge component of this. And even guided experimentation, where it's like, I have no idea what to do. Like, we have so many low carb doctors, keto doctors, carnivore doctors, health coaches. I mean, Diet Doctor has this really big list where you can just look and, oh, look, there's one in my area. Or, oh, there's not one in my area, but here's another one that does remote consultation. And just working with them to troubleshoot if you don't know where to start or what's the most likely thing. The benefit of working with a doctor, especially one who's familiar with low carb, is that they have all of this clinical experience where they've seen a whole wide range of cases. And it's like, oh, your case looks exactly like this other one I dealt with. It's probably this thing. Or, oh, usually if you're experiencing that, it's just this thing. Just change that, and then, we'll see how it goes. And so there's so many resources, and even things like private lab testing, CGMs, continuous glucose monitors, where you can get real-time data on what your blood sugar's doing in response to various things. Just so much is available now where it's like, okay, we can really get the data that's important to us and figure out, oh, if I do this, if I don't sleep very well, my blood sugar goes back into the diabetic range the next day, or anything like that. So I know I need to really focus on good sleep. Like, that is so incredibly important. And I'm just glad to be alive in this time where I can go to a private lab and, oh, I want to look at this and this and this and this because I think that relates to what I suspect is the issue. Oh, they came back weird. Okay, I'll work on this and then see how they react to whatever I'm doing. I've seen so many significant changes from people just deciding, this is my health, this is my responsibility. I don't want to feel like this anymore. It's time to really get serious about this and collect this data and make smart decisions and work with my health team. And then their life is just changed forever. It's like, great, awesome, excellent.
Yeah, and it nowadays too, our diagnostic tools have become so much more advanced to the diagnostic tools that were being used when a lot of our current dietary standards were put into effect, as far as actually becoming government policy. When people like Ansel Keys and even Weston A. Price, who went for real food, low carb, even now, if he had the diagnostic tools of today, how could his theories have been altered and changed, and how could his mind have been changed? We have to realize that we have new tools to look at things in a different way. So with these new tools, we have to be open to changing our minds.
Absolutely. As we get more information, it could be that what we thought was super obvious and of course it works that way is actually not how it works at all. And it's okay. Like, the whole point is to learn and better understand so that we can make better decisions about our health and about the population's health and all this type of stuff. And it could be that there's multiple answers. In this context, the answer is this. In this context, the answer is this, etc. And I'm super excited for what we're going to learn, especially with regards to ketogenic metabolism and all this different type of stuff regarding metabolic syndrome. Because, like you were saying, we do have these awesome tools, and now we can go back at the old research, replicate it with all this new information, and just learn so much more from that. And there's probably a lot of assumptions about how metabolism works and how fat works from a high carb perspective. And now we can be like, oh, what does this do in a ketogenic context? What does this do in a carnivorous context? We had this assumption, but now we can go and look at it in a whole new light and see if it's still true. And that's exciting, super exciting.
Yeah. And who knows what happens 10 years from now with the new tools that are being currently tested, with what kind of data we could bring in. You've been doing some more research on other aspects of keto too. Like, you've got probably a list of 10 different things that have all been going on, I guess, recently or simultaneously, or you're a very busy person.
Yeah, I think that would be an accurate description. Yeah, so a lot of what I've been focusing on is projects with Dave. We started a private lab testing service on yourlabs.com. That's been taking up a lot of my time, just tweaking things and getting all the wrinkles ironed out, stuff like that. And I've been having a lot of fun with that. And the fun thing with that is that one of the things is we don't have a lot of information about what things look like when people are low carb or carnivore or even plant-based and stuff like that. And so one of the things that you can do with Own Your Labs is when you're checking out, there's this checkout with discount option. And when you select that, you're opting in to submit your anonymized data. So your name, where you live, all that type of stuff is redacted out. But when your results come in, they get added to this anonymized database. And it's like, oh, this person is carnivore and they look like this. Or if we group all the carnivores together, this is kind of what it looks like, type of thing. And so that's fun. It's fun just to, kind of get this project really going. And it's something that has probably been a good thing to be working on for a while, especially with ketogenic diets and carnivorous diets gaining popularity. And this isn't me like trying to push like, oh, you have to like use this service or whatever. I just think it's cool. And the other thing is I don't make any money off of it. All of the proceeds go to the Citizen Science Foundation. which is the 501c3 nonprofit that Dave and I started. And the project that is working on is the lean mass hyperresponder study, which I'm sure he talked about at length. And so both of those things take up a lot of my time. And then, of course, just maintaining cholesterol code and answering all the comments that come in and things like that. And then doing experiments. And then researching.
Yeah. Yeah, I can imagine it's a lot to carry over. Have you guys been looking at how the low carb diet is playing a role at all in immunity response when it comes to fighting off infections, like maybe some current large infection that name shall not be mentioned because of possible censoring?
Right. So I had looked into that specific topic when it first started coming up because I was really curious about the existing data on it and what we can kind of learn from it. And as far as ketogenic diets playing into that specifically, I haven't been, but there are two things that I'll give you to put in the show notes. One of them is a clinical trial looking at how ketogenic diets may play in with people who are already sick, if it helps mortality, for example. And then another, which is arguing that ketogenic diets may be useful and kind of outlines why it may be. And again, there may be nuance to it. Is it, helpful if you're ketogenic before and less so if you're already sick? I don't think we know that. But one thing we do know with regards to that is that people with underlying health issues like diabetes and metabolic syndrome, obesity do seem to have it worse off. And we already kind of know that generally ketogenic diets can help with that. So if those are important factors to consider, then yeah, maybe it'll be helpful. But yeah, I really want good, strong research coming back on that. And I think eventually we'll probably get it, especially with that clinical trial, which is still ongoing. So I'll be looking at, what they publish and what they find. But yeah, mostly I have a long list of muted words on Twitter, and there are quite a few related to that on there because it's like,
yeah,
I'm already stressed enough.
I think I'm going to call it Sauron, just for
yeah, Sauron.
So one of the theories that I was thinking of is related back to the inflammation. If you're constantly in a chronic state of inflammation, which we know is bad, versus acute inflammation for injury, illness, your immune system's being overtaxed. It's constantly working, and it may not work as well if another infection comes in.
Yeah, it's funny that you say that because that main central point is something I've been thinking about for a long time. And so that not only relates to, Sauron, and to clarify, we don't know. This is an ongoing thing. We need to focus on learning, so no conclusions can be drawn. Not saying that. But with diabetes, for example, we know that people with severe diabetes can have infections that don't resolve, which can lead to needing amputations. Is that also another example of you are overtaxing your immune system all the time, and then you introduce this new problem, and yeah, it might not resolve. It might not do things quite right. And is that also what we're seeing with autoimmune diseases as one example? That's a strong claim to make, and I'm not making that claim, but there is a researcher who's been looking into multiple sclerosis for something, I think, for like a decade. And he published a paper where he was saying, hey, maybe this autoimmune reaction isn't random. Maybe what's happening is the myelin in the brain is becoming damaged, and then the immune system starts this autoimmune reaction in response to that damage. If that's the case, that's really, really, really important because it could impact how we, treat MS in the future. Currently, still a hypothesis, still needs to be investigated, and I think the team is working on that. But if it ends up being true for MS, is it also true for arthritis or other things like psoriasis? And could this be why people are sometimes seeing improvements or resolution of the symptoms when they're going keto or carnivore, because that is something, it's one of the major things that people report back, like Michaela, oh, my arthritis went into remission. I know people who've mentioned psoriasis. I had eczema go into remission, like all this different stuff. And it's like, okay, this could be really, really important. If this is happening, potentially, we don't know yet, because the immune system is being overtaxed all the time from diet or environmental factors. If we change that, is it possible that these things could resolve or not be an issue in the first place? Who knows? It's this huge, massive avenue of exploration that could be really important. And another interesting thing is a lot of the time people will comment, oh, I went keto and now I never get sick. It's like, oh, is that because your immune system can really just focus on having this initial really strong reaction as soon as you get infected and then just takes care of it, and so you're not symptomatic?
Yeah.
Maybe. I would love that to be investigated. And so, yeah, the overtaxed immune system hypothesis is something I've been speculating on. And I'm starting to see in other areas that, this may have some support behind it as far as the data that we have, but it's still very inconclusive. And so I don't want to say, oh, yeah, if you stop taxing your immune system, all your problems will be resolved forever. No, like I can't possibly. But is it worth exploring? I definitely think so. And I even occasionally use a term in reference to it, which is just like immune system otherwise occupied.
Right.
And so it's like, oh, we see this thing in people who are very metabolically unhealthy. Maybe that's because immune system otherwise occupied.
Right. Well, I mean, if you could draw a correlation in a different way, but you look at things like HIV and AIDS, very few people actually die from the viral load of HIV or AIDS. It's always a secondary infection because
Yeah.
the viral load has destroyed the immune system and can no longer function. So things like a cold become a life-threatening disease now. And
Absolutely.
so that's kind of where I was thinking about the overtaxing of the immune system and how it could affect. If your immune system is already occupied or impaired in some way, obviously another infection is going to be more deadly.
Yeah, definitely. I think it is compelling, and because it's such a touchy topic, I just try not to get anywhere near. I'll leave that to the researchers to figure out. But yeah, if they ended up investigating that and found, oh yeah, that is why people with diabetes and who are obese or metabolically unhealthy are having an issue, or even the elderly, which they're more at risk of infection as well. That would be super fascinating.
Well, with reading Nutrition and Physical Degeneration, which I seem to reference a lot on this show, you could probably do a drinking game of it. But when Weston A. Price was traveling the world and he was seeing people who were not just eating their native traditional foods in more tribal or rural areas, but also living more of a lifestyle that matches up with the circadian rhythm. They were going to sleep at certain times. They were living an overall of what we are now viewing as a more healthy lifestyle. They found that a lot of these people had things like tuberculosis widespread in their communities, but nobody was symptomatic. And
Yeah, fascinating.
but when they went to the industrial areas, where not just are they eating the industrial foods, but they're getting exposed to a lot more environmental toxins. So their toxic load is overloaded. Their sleep patterns are probably destroyed. And we know from reading Upton Sinclair's The Jungle that the industrial areas were not the most pleasant place to be. So more and more people were expressing those symptoms of tuberculosis, and it was becoming life-threatening in those communities, and they were passing away.
Yeah, it's definitely endlessly fascinating. And I think there are so many hints that we can get from comparing, oh, what's the frequency of something in an indigenous population, for example, or just a generally healthy population. I tend to go there because it's an easy one to pick and say, these people are generally healthy. Let's go look at them. And also looking at other things like, oh, They don't really have as many issues like allergies or autoimmune diseases or Alzheimer's or heart disease or diabetes. Why is that exactly? And if something is at a low rate there and then a high rate in, Western society eating whatever diet, then it's like, this makes me wonder if the conclusions about, oh, these things are entirely genetic, there's nothing you can do. If that's the case, then why would there be such a split, especially if you expose those people to the same diet and environment that we're eating and then they get sick within the same generation, which is what happened in Okinawa? Or, if they come here and they start eating our diet and then the same thing happens. It works both ways. We take it to them or they come here and start consuming it. Yeah, it, it calls a lot of things into question and a lot of assumptions into question. And I would really like those investigated and clarified of, oh, is this actually a context thing? Where, in an immunology textbook, you'll read allergies and autoimmune diseases are increasing in frequency, but also they're largely genetic or mostly genetic or whatever. It's like, wait, I don't know that those two statements really fit together that well. Maybe there's some other component to this. I think it's worth exploring for sure. And it's, yeah, complicated, but I mean, there's hints that we can kind of see and say, oh, this part is probably worth investigating of if this is true. And if so, it could be, like I said, a life changer for a lot of people.
Give me just 1 second. I'm going to turn on the lights. Everything got dark in here all of a sudden.
Sure.
All right. There we go. All right. So, yeah, it's, a lot of these researches into a single cause for for immune system or things like that, I honestly feel are really misguided, and it's very short-sighted. And I relate to a lot of our issues in society when we look at things that way, of looking at just the surface problem and not what actually causes that problem. Culturally, it's an issue in our society with a lot of the things that we see on the news. And then when we do it with our physical bodies and we're not looking at all these overlaying causes, it really seems to be a definitely a handicap on our way of thinking, which is I think where the people like yourself and Dave and Ivor and those that look at things with an engineering mind, Nina Teicholz for one, and Gary Taubes, they very much look at whole systems rather than just surface problems. And you guys are the ones, I think, that are going to spearhead changing a lot of the ways we look at things, and the more inclusive we are with the data of all kinds of different aspects.
Yeah, and again, like, this is not just us. There's so much existing research and ongoing research from non-low carbers. Like, I think non-low carbers can have, or rather, I think low carbers can have a specific perspective because they already have this experience of, oh, things didn't actually work the way I thought they did. But the MS researcher, for example, I seriously doubt he's low carb. I'm sure he's just like some normal person working and living as anyone else does. But he has really interesting ideas and he's following them up with his team and has been for a long time. And there's a lot of interesting research regarding, the gut microbiome, as young as that is, as young as that understanding is, I mean, and, gut permeability and inflammation related processes and how the immune system can change metabolism. Like, there are papers from, the 1950s, 1960s that are talking about some of this stuff already. And it's really a process of trying to piece it together and understand how it all fits together. And yeah, thinking about it from that system perspective. And yeah, so hopefully this will lead to long-term better understanding. That would be my hope anyway. And I hope that people from many different perspectives, many different diets can all add their input and say, oh, I figured out this piece of the puzzle. Let me add it. And I found out this piece. Let me add that. And then just all working to better understand and not come to hasty conclusions and not rely on poor data, but really try hard to push past our biases because everybody has them, and just try and really understand what's going on, because we have to. Like, what we're doing now is just not sustainable for society, for insurance companies, for the cost of medical care is just not not gonna work. And so yeah, that would be my ideal, is just everyone from all sides coming together and being like, we have to figure this out. And it probably isn't one molecule or one tiny thing. It's probably an overall context that we have to really understand to fix the problem. And yeah, I'll see it with like Alzheimer's research, for example. We found a higher proportion of these microbes or this protein or whatever in the brain. And for example, like finding bacteria in the brain or whatever. It's like, infections must cause Alzheimer's because they have more bacteria in the brain or whatever it is. It's like, well, maybe it's that the context that they're in means that they're having a harder time fighting off infections, for example, or that the barrier between the brain and everything else is compromised. I mean, we kind of can see that in Alzheimer's and MS as well, where the blood-brain barrier isn't functioning quite properly. And so maybe it lets bacteria in easier if it is damaged. That's another thing that's worth exploring. And the infection thing is like, if that's the case, then wouldn't we see higher rates of Alzheimer's in societies that don't have access to antibiotics and things like that, or getting more frequent infections? And we don't. So maybe that's not quite right. And it's really just a process of trying to falsify yourself over and over again. It's like, oh, I think it's this. If it isn't that, how would I know? Like, what would I be looking for? And then trying to find that thing. And it's really difficult because your brain wants to assume that you are correct. And it's an ongoing process of, no, let's try and not assume I'm correct. Let's assume I'm actually wrong. Like, I want to know that as soon as possible so I don't waste my time looking into this for any longer than I have to, because that's a waste of time. And
the confirmation bias is strong in our society. So people, unfortunately, in our current society, we've put more stock into opinion and belief rather than fact, or even the desire to seek that fact. So,
right. I mean, this is part of the human condition, I guess you can say. We want to be a part of the tribe. We want to believe what other people believe. We don't want to stick out. And that can, be a problem. But it's something we all have to deal with. It's not just in our society. It's just humans. It's a human problem. It's a brain problem where it's like the brain is like, I want to work through this specific pathway. And it's like, I know you want to do that, but that's not really the best thing. And that's why we have the scientific process of, the null hypothesis, setting up a hypothesis and trying to disprove it, like all this type of stuff, is to try and prevent that immediate, yes, this must be the answer response. Like this whole structure is just trying to work around being human.
Right. And you have some, I like to make the podcast about total health, and you have some things that also relate to your health, and you actually do a podcast on, and these are your hobbies. And
Yeah.
so I want you to talk real quick. Tell us about your hobby and your podcast related to your hobby, and tell us people about it, because this might be something that people may be interested in joining you on.
I I don't know about that. So, one of my major hobbies is actually knitting. So this shawl that I'm wearing, I made. It took a while. I have a lot of fun with it. My mom taught me to knit when I was like 8 or something, and I crocheted before that. Um, and it's just a very relaxing hobby for me. I can pick a pattern where I don't have to think at all if I've had a really busy work day. It's like I just want to like put my hands to work and not think about what I'm doing because I thought a lot today and that's exhausting. And if I have a slower day, then after work I may pick a more complicated project and work on that or design my own project. I have a couple different ones. I seriously doubt my dad will listen to this. So I'm designing him a hat that I'll be calling the first service hat. That's kind of in memory of all the times we went to certain places together when I was a kid. And that's just really fun, like thinking about a person and then like, okay, I'm going to make this for them and it's special for them. And I've also designed a cowl for mom that I called the contact inhibition cowl, which is about like one of my favorite papers. It's talking about when endothelial cells are all touching in kind of this flat sheet, they won't take up LDL as much, but then if you like disturb them, then they'll suddenly start taking it up. And they call that process contact inhibition because the process of uptake is inhibited when they're in contact. And that's just a really fun paper. So I was like, I want to design a cowl after this. And yeah, so there's that. And one thing that I would often do when I lived with my parents is I'd go to mom's office and I'd say, oh, I'm working on this and like pull things out. And, like, here's how it's going. Or I like totally messed up and misread the pattern and I had to rip out like 20 rows and it sucked. But when I moved out to Colorado, I couldn't do that anymore. And like, sure, Amber has some passing interest in what I'm working on, but she's not a knitter. And so there's not this long, involved conversation that can happen. And it's also not my mom. And so I started a knitting podcast a while back. I think I'm like 5 episodes in. And it's just that same process of pulling things out. It's like, here's the yarn that I'm using. Here's where I got it from. Here's all the problems I had. And it majorly sucked. And originally it was like just for her to watch, but then other people started finding it and commenting on it. I mean, not very many people. It's like 50. It's not that much. But still, it's interesting and I like sharing and sharing what I've learned and the mistakes that I've made and how I fixed them. And so I started like now when I have a new episode out, I like tentatively put it up on Twitter like, hey, if you kind of sort of want to watch, you can. I don't know that it's very good or entertaining, but apparently it is to some people. So that's one of the major hobbies.
Well, knitting, much like when I draw, it's very much like a moving meditation.
Definitely,
You can
yeah.
clear your head. So it's a very healthy hobby to have. I actually had a couple of truck driver friends who were dudes who knitted like crazy.
Oh, that's awesome.
And yeah, and one of them in particular, he knitted beanies, stocks, and warmies for the children at his local hospital in the cancer ward.
Yeah, I know a lot of people who do that, like the preemies, just knitting for hospitals or homeless shelters in general. If I had extra time, I would be doing that because we have these little free library boxes and I want to like make hats and just stick them in there. Like whoever needs a hat can take one. But this year has been ridiculously busy, so not this time. But yeah, and it is definitely moving meditation. Like I'm the kind of person where it's like normal meditation of like sitting and just let your thoughts like blah 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 just annoys me. Like I get really irritated immediately. And I think part of it is like I don't like being told what to do, even if that person is me. But with knitting, it feels like I'm doing something productive and I'm not bored. And, at the end of the knitting session, I can look and be like, oh, I made like an inch of progress or I got through this pattern repeat, whatever. And it's really satisfying. And then, of course, at the end, I have something nice, or I can give my mom something, or my dad something. Or I recently made the youngest housemate a hat, which he was super excited about. And I just don't like feeling like I'm not being productive. So a lot of the hobbies that I used to have, like playing games, for example, I just don't do as much anymore. Because it's like, I'm doing this, but I could actually be doing something productive. And that's not to like diss on playing games. It's a good relaxation thing. I just have my own ways of thinking that it doesn't mesh as well anymore. But
What's
yeah,
the
and
name
then
of your podcast?
it's the Full Fat Knitting Podcast. Like I just had to, my sister actually suggested the name because I was like, I don't know what to name this. I was going to name it something really like weird with a obscure scientific term. And my sister was like, just call it the Full Fat Knitting Podcast. I was like, wow. Yeah.
Well, I'm going to invite you to share about your podcast on the Fatty Joe Show group. If you want to come over and join, anything that you want to share, including the podcast, and maybe you can get some knitting partners from our group. And if you send me some information on it, I will share it to our private groups as well as the Fatty Joe Show page.
Nice. I'll definitely join that page. I like the only reason I use Facebook anymore is for the groups. So yeah, I'll definitely check that out. And yeah, I found that throughout my life, a big thing that I struggle with is just the constant looming boredom that's like right around the corner at all times. And so whenever something gets too easy, it's like I either have to crank up the difficulty or increase something new. So with knitting, it was like following really simple patterns and then more complicated patterns and then adjusting patterns to fit what I wanted and then just designing my own patterns. So I don't know where that's going to go, but and then also just within the past couple of months, I started working on learning Japanese because it's a language that I just find really fun. And there's a ton of entertainment in media from Japan that's really interesting. And one of my goals, and I suspect this will take like legit years, is to read some of my favorite classical Japanese literature in Japanese and just see like sometimes certain nuance in choices that the author has made is lost in translation, and that's true of anything. It's like I really want to see what kind of tone they're using, what specific words they've chosen for certain scenes, like the flow of their writing. I'm excited for that. It's going to take a long time, but I've been working on it.
And these are all great exercises for your brain health. They've shown that people that speak, polydactics who speak multiple languages often do not succumb to Alzheimer's or dementia through age, that their brains kind of stave off a lot of these issues that many people in our culture are experiencing. It's not always true. It's not a 100% thing, but it seems to be a correlation in it. So I like this because it will maybe inspire people to find their own hobbies and find things to keep occupied, especially right now where so many people have lost a lot of the things that they want to be able to do. It may encourage people to find something new to experience and learn so that they can keep improving themselves or keep themselves occupied in a very challenging time.
Yeah, definitely. I think boredom is really difficult, and a lot of people's hobbies can sometimes be tied into social things like going to bars or parties or whatever, and then suddenly they've lost that. And with that, they lose a lot of social connection, and socialization is very important for people. Like I'm an introvert, but I do have like a minimum threshold that I need to meet. And, doing the podcast, although it's not a pure replacement for that, it helps to have a sense of community and people to talk to and learn new things and feel like I'm not just sitting at home stuck inside doing nothing, because that's not a very fun thing. And even with like more active hobbies, like there's tons of exercise you can do at home with no equipment if you like exercising. Isometric exercises are great, just using body resistance training and stuff like that. There's also, things here that I can go outside and go on a hike or a walk, and I can keep my distance from other people, but that's a very relaxing thing, and I enjoy being able to do that. And language learning, knitting, learning to sing, piano, like all this different stuff are available, and often there's online communities for it. And yeah, I think it's healthy to have hobbies. And I wonder if part of it is also that kind of the healthier you are, the more energy you have for that type of thing. Because, after that high carb experiment, there was a good 2 months where my health and mental health was at like peak not good. I mean, not the worst it's ever been for sure, but the worst it had been in a long time. And I found that my creativity had kind of disappeared, and my knitting kind of planning for designs, I was really struggling with it and I couldn't get up the motivation to do it. And yeah, it was kind of frightening in a way because it's like, wait, what happened? And it did eventually come back, and that was kind of sign for me that I was getting back to a better place. Um, so yeah, I would highly encourage people to find something that they enjoy doing, even if there's no actual health benefit. Like having fun is good.
Yeah.
Please make time for fun.
And I think there is a health benefit to having fun. I mean, comedy, things like that, we have proven to have a physiological response in people. So we're going to get ready to close out because I'm actually running out of power on the iPad. So I am going to ask my standard questions I try to ask everybody, and then we want to make sure that we leave the contact details at the end. And my first question is, what are 3 foods you think everybody should avoid?
That everybody should avoid? I don't know. Well, I guess copious amounts of seed oils would probably be an easy one. Other than that, I think it's probably largely individual. And, if something doesn't make you feel good when you're eating it a lot, maybe just try removing that thing and see if that's making you feel worse. But specifically, I largely think diet's going to depend on the context, like we talked about, and even preference. Like some people avoid things out of preference. I don't like liver; it makes me feel gross, and it's also disgusting, so I don't eat it. So for me, that's in my top 3.
There you go. And what are 3 foods you think everybody should include in their diet? And you could be generic about it, like classifications of food or, certain fats or whatever.
Yeah, again, it's another individual thing. So foods that result in you being healthy and being full of energy and having a healthy sex drive and all that type of stuff, probably those things. What that
Here
is, I
you.
could not tell you.
Okay. Who are 5 of your health heroes?
Let's see. Definitely my mom would be number one because she got me into this whole thing. She's wicked smart, and she's been doing keto alongside me for these past nearly 4.5 years. She's lost about the same amount that I have. She has found that keto has helped with arthritis that she developed from having Lyme disease twice. Only mom would get Lyme disease twice. So yeah, definitely her. She's also made massive improvements on the concussion that she had. She had a lot of memory issues afterwards that lingered actually for several years, and then she went keto, and I don't think she's like 100%, but she's like 90% back to normal, which is a big deal. Like she has to
I
think a lot.
I know that. Yeah, I know that feeling.
Yeah. Number 2, I mean, Amber O'Hearn, my roommate, she has tremendously improved her mental health with diet. She's definitely gone through a lot of struggles and experimenting, and she's probably still doing that, honestly, but just the tenacity. And number 3, April Eiley, she's the person who was diabetic despite going keto, despite trialing carnivore. And I know she's made a lot of progress. It's still an ongoing journey, but she was interviewed on Daisy's podcast, Keto Woman. So you can find her story there. I would highly recommend it, especially if you're ever struggling. Like, just go listen to that and know, like, even if it's extremely hard, if you just keep trying to find those answers, keep experimenting, sometimes things can change in a massive way. Yeah, Andrew Scarborough is another one, and basically just like so many of the different people that I meet. Yeah, there's so many in the community where it's like, I've reversed this issue, I've reversed this issue. I really struggled, but now I'm in a good place. And it's like, I draw inspiration from all of those people, and I hope I can somewhat contribute back to that and inspire other people as well. Like, that's the whole point of community. So yeah, just everyone who has ever taken their own health into their own hands and dramatically changed their own life. Every single one of them, even if I've never met them yet.
Nice. Yeah. That question is really to just bring out more resources to people, but also to, because so many of us have like lists of health heroes, but I have to for time.
Another one I'll mention is Nif. She is Seizure Salad on Twitter, and she has kept her epilepsy in remission with the ketogenic diet, and it was like really, really, really bad. She was on a whole ton of medications. They were considering brain surgery, and finally she tried keto, and like, I can't even imagine being in that situation and finally just finding something that actually worked and didn't have all these side effects and issues that she was experiencing, and what a joy that must be, and just how absolutely life-changing. Yeah, I would definitely recommend looking into her story. I believe she's been on the Low Carb MD podcast. Yeah.
Definitely. I love the name. That's such a creative name.
Yeah.
So, what is some sort of health myth you wish you could get rid of overnight?
Probably that, if you're facing some sort of mental health issue, that it is always this chemical imbalance thing and there's nothing you can do about it, and you can go to therapy and blah, 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 but you'll always, suffer with it. And maybe in some cases that is true, but I mean, the work of Georgia Ede is definitely something I wish were more well-known and discussed just in the mainstream of, hey, nutrition may be playing a part, and it's low risk, potentially high reward. Perhaps it's worth investigating if you're struggling. Sometimes people don't see improvement until they go carnivore, like Amber had lingering mental health issues until carnivore, things like that. And the other thing is the opposite. Sometimes diet does not fix everything. Sometimes you do need that therapy. Sometimes you do need that additional support. Sometimes, things are difficult. And so those two sides of the coin, diet can sometimes help. And maybe it's something we should discuss as a possibility, and something we should just be telling people that, this is being researched. We do have, anecdotes at the least for right now. This is something that probably isn't going to result in a lot of side effects or complications. And yes, you should definitely work with someone, especially if you're on medications, but it's a maybe. And on the other hand, if you're doing a ketogenic diet or carnivorous diet and there's just some things that are still bothering you, like, go get that therapy. Go get that counseling, like talk to someone. Maybe it's, something you weren't equipped to deal with at the time that it happened. Maybe you just need to talk to someone, have someone know what you're going through. So both sides.
And what is something that, if you could change something in the medical field, the medical healthcare field overnight, what would it be?
Probably just doctors knowing that there's more options if what they're using in the clinic isn't working. I know that's a major issue, is doctors becoming jaded and becoming burnt out and genuinely becoming depressed. It's something I've talked to my own doctor about. Doctors are struggling, and I think part of that is they genuinely love and care for their patients, and the advice that they're getting now may not be working as much as they want it to, or may not be working at all for their patients. And it's sad. Like, these are people that you care about. These are people that you went to medical school, worked grueling hours, all this type of stuff to help. And then, you just keep seeing them and they're getting worse and worse. And one thing that I've heard a lot from low carb doctors is, once they realized, oh, there's another strategy that may actually help these people, in massive ways. And even if it's not low carb, even if it's whatever, helping them with a certain type of therapy, group discussions, like all this different stuff, focusing on sleep, focusing on stress reduction. There are other things that may be worth exploring that could be really useful for you and your patients. And ultimately, everyone then improves. Their health improves. Their joy in life improves. Your joy in your job can improve. That's something I've heard a lot from doctors who have found these other strategies. And it's like, I can finally help people. That's what I wanted to do all this time.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that. And I don't think anybody's brought that one like up in that way before of the issues that doctors that are going through that are affecting their ability to provide the healthcare.
Yeah, definitely. And it troubles me a lot. Like,
Yeah.
these are people who went into healthcare because they care about people's health. And it can reflect on their own self-esteem, their own feelings of their self-worth and value in their life. And yeah, I just wish it was taught for doctors to experiment too. And I'm
Yeah.
sure there are plenty who do and all that type of stuff, like not dissing doctors, but for the ones who are struggling, maybe just try something different or kind of look and see what data is available that may be relevant to your patients. And then, maybe try it on yourself first if you're not sure, and then maybe see if it could help them. Even if, you're talking to them and it's like, I don't know if this is going to help you, but I have found data to suggest maybe it could in your situation. And do you want to try it together? And I'll help you if you do.
That's awesome. So if people want to find Siobhan Huggins, what are all the contact details?
So if you have lipid-related questions, the best one to go with is cholesterolcode.com. I don't often reply to DMs and private messages just as a time sync thing. I will set aside time every day to answer comments on Cholesterol Code, though, so that's a good place to go. If you just want a community that's kind of talking about the science behind cholesterol and lean mass hyperresponders, which we didn't get into, but I'm sure Dave did, we do have the Cholesterol Code Facebook group and then the Lean Mass Hyperresponder Facebook group. I really like both of those. I like the community that we've kind of built and the respectfulness and all that type of stuff. And I'm fairly active on Twitter, Siobhan_Huggins. You can also check out Own Your Labs if you want to, but we do encourage shopping around, comparing pricing. There are some things where it's better just to get it elsewhere because it's a lot cheaper. And that's kind of what we care about, like affordable labs. If we can't, I'll just straight up tell you, you should probably go to this other place. They got way better deals. You can also check out the Citizen Science Foundation and the work we're doing there. And yeah, I think that about covers it. I'm also on Facebook. You can add me. I think it's like Siobhan.Huggins.509 or something. But if you look me up, you'll find me.
Definitely. And so I want to close out the show, everybody, because the power is down to 3%. And so I want to encourage everybody to go look up the work that Siobhan and Dave are doing. It is really enlightening, and it can give you a lot of tools and resources to take charge of your own health. I also want to encourage everybody. Oh.
Yeah, one more resource, because I'm completely biased. Go check out Amber O'Hearn's book. It's in progress. It's being posted as it's being written. It's really fascinating, and I'm waiting anxiously for new chapters. She also has tons of other blog posts and resources on carnivore. Highly recommend. 2 thumbs up. Definitely biased, but it's fine.
She's one of the ones that I am definitely going to ask to come on the show because I met her at one of the conventions. She's a great lady, and I love her story and the research that she's doing herself and putting out. So I have a whole list of people I'm trying to get to, and a lot of it started with the order of how I found the people.
Yeah.
So I was just kind of going along. That's why the first 5 episodes are early influencer series. These are the first people I found to get me on my journey. So
yeah, it's definitely interesting to just kind of go back and revisit those people and be like, what you been working on?
Yeah. So I also want to encourage everybody. It is the holidays, and it is also leading, probably when this comes out, leading outside of the holidays, possibly towards Super Bowl. Check out Carrie Brown's masterclasses. The ice cream masterclass has got a course up, running, static. There's a holiday masterclass, which the holiday food in that class shouldn't just be for the holidays. I'm telling you, man, like, if you want a Super Bowl party with some awesome keto appetizers, there's some great recipes in there for that. And plus pecan pie, I'm sorry, it should be eaten at least once a month. And she has a great recipe for pecan pie. So make sure you check out the Carrie Brown cookbooks. There is a bunch of them up there. The keto crock pot was something that I used in the truck a lot. My favorite recipe out of there is the beefcake stew, which was inspired by the Cuban Cowl, Danny Vega. And it's a fantastic beef stew. I love it. And it incorporates whiskey. So that's another reason why I'm a big fan.
Yeah, that's always a good sign.
Yes. So be sure to check all that out. Check out the Fatty Joe Show page. We're just getting that started. The Fatty Joe Show group, if you want to come in and talk to us. We had just got that started. Also, the Keto Kitchen with Carrie Brown and Yogi Parker. And if you want to support the podcast, keep us ad-free, go to patreon.com/the Carrie Brown or patreon.com/the Fatty Joe Show. And you can help fund the show and keep us ad-free for as long as possible. Hopefully one day we'll get enough people in where I don't have to edit the shows because it takes so long and I can focus on putting more content out. So
yeah, if you want a recommendation for an editor, I can give you one.
Yeah, Chris Duckett is going to be probably my go-to right now, but I will definitely take some recommendations for others just in case he gets too busy to handle us by the time I'm ready.
Yeah, definitely.
So, all right, everybody. As always, I want to encourage everybody, especially now in these times, be kind to one another. Being nasty and being just mean toward other people comes back on you. When you're kind and you put this kindness out, it is something that will come back to you tenfold. So, and it makes everything better around you. When you're kind to people, it creates a better environment, which is much more relaxing and less inflammatory on your system than not being kind to people. So, everybody, so long. I will see you all later. And Siobhan, thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah, and thanks so much for having me on.
Anytime. The door is always open to you. If there's something you want to come and talk about, just reach out to me.
Excellent. So, and yeah, I'd also like to extend happy holidays to everyone. If this does come out after the holidays, I hope they were fantastic and awesome. And I can definitely reiterate just try and be nice. For me, my life is a lot more pleasant when I just go that extra mile and just try to be nice to someone. Often people will kind of return what you give them. So
all right, everybody. Want to go ahead and close out the show. I am out of reviews to read on the air, so if you could be so kind to leave a review down below so I could read your review on one of the upcoming episodes, that would be fantastic. All right, everybody. Be kind to one another, and I will see you on the next episode.
There we go.
Thank you for joining us on the Fatty Joe Show. Be sure to leave a comment and subscribe. It helps the show reach more people. To support the show, as well as Carrie Brown and Yogi's work on the blog, keto recipe development, masterclasses, and to gain access to private Facebook groups and other awards, go to patreon.com/thefattyjoeshow or patreon.com/Carrie Brown. Also, check out our Carrie Brown and Yogi Parker YouTube channel for video versions of The Fatty Joe Show, recipe videos, and more. Join our awesome community on the Facebook group, The Keto Kitchen with Carrie Brown and Yogi Parker, and check out our carriebrown.com website for recipes, blog posts, discounts, cookbooks, masterclasses, and other great stuff. Thank you so much.